Hello, I am coming to you as a pop-up live stream on a Friday evening, 8 p.m. for Journey of an Aesthete podcast. And basically, it's a way to do some creative, impromptu, improvised episodes and programs on the spur of the moment. Although, to be fair, everything that I do, however improvised it is and however spontaneous it is based on, kind of things I've been working on for many years and ideas and musings and philosophies and theories and many things like that. So I just wanted to pop in and talk a little bit about maybe Fred Astaire. So here's the thing. I'm wearing right now a sport coat in a cloth that's the exact same fabric cloth that Fred Astaire himself wore. And this is some years back, I think 2014, 13, somewhere in there. I was at a tailor and they said we have a special discount or a special offer that we have these two bolts of fabric that were worn by Fred Astaire in his movies, both checks, different kinds of checks. In a Scottish wools, right? And I chose to have two coats made in the fabric. And this is the one. This is I could show you here. It's kind of difficult, because I don't really know. See, everything's falling apart. As you can see, I've accessorized it a little differently than did he. He wore actually a stripe with it, and I wore more of a solid. And it's I have two. I'm going to put the other one on now. So when you're doing anything involving design or what they call bespoke, can be a very involved, dense affair. And this is the other one. This is I don't know if I have a copy of the photo of this particular garment. I don't know. I mean, I know I have this one here. Anyhow, I just thought, I should talk a little bit about this. So these are what we call fully bespoke garments. That is that you start with a cloth, which is this, right? And then you are free, utterly free. I mean, not totally free, because there are rules and canons of traditional dress, but putting all that aside, those strictures aside, you're free to do different things with design. And also, it's made by hand, so this is not made on a machine. It's made by tailors, and as was the other. And I have two of them, and it's interesting. I over the years, you can see behind me, I have a signed photo of Astaire. I have this American Film. I was subscribing to American Film magazine in the late 70s and early 80s as a boy, and one of the issues has old Fred on the cover. There's so much I could say about Fred Astaire. I mean, as at the opening, I played in the background. I don't know if you could hear it. His great album with Oscar Peterson from the 50s. And that's a 50s album. It's 1957, I think, with the Jazz of the Philharmonic folks and with all these arrangements. And I'm just gonna show you. So give you a taste of it, going back to the clothes for a second. This is a good example of what I mean. This is one of the mills. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any documentation of the exact Scottish mill that made these two pieces of cloth. I don't have that. I mean, I know. I mean, there's a small amount of mills that work usually in the Outer Hebrides or in certain parts of outside of London, and these are mills that have been making these fabrics for roughly between 150 to 250 years. So starting mainly in the before the 19th century. So often they could trace it back to the mid 18th century, the new mills and things of the Industrial Revolution and all that, and some pre-industrial things. But and they sometimes they keep making the same cloths decade after decade and even century after century because they're traditional cloths that men have always worn, that are kind of always perennial and always in demand. And the one I have on now is a really, really classical, in more than one sense of the word, example of that, because it's a brown, it's not black, it's a chocolate brown and tan check. And Fred Astaire wore this exact, I know he wore this exact coat, I think, in Funny Face in one of the scenes. I don't remember which one. And again, I could be like Ben Makowitz here and do this whole TCM thing and have all the clips. I'm not that, since it's a pop-up, it's going to be a little more casual. I'm not going to be as what's the word? Exacting in what I present. But I thought it'd be fun to share some of these things, like some of these pictures. Now, if you're in England, this is what you will see. This is Fox Brothers. And this is how they organize their product. And look, lo and behold, what do we have here? Whose legs are those? Those are Fred Astaire's legs, because Fred Astaire loved Fox Brothers flannel. The way they wove flannel, there was a specificity and quality to their flannels that it supposedly was unsurpassed by other folks. Again, in terms of the kind of clothing that I wear, there's basically only really two fabrics. There's a worsted and there's a woolen. And a worsted, of course, is sort of has a twill in it. It's a little harder and a little more practical and can dress it up a little bit more. Flannel has an open weave. It's not a worsted. And flannels, are kind of more in the woolen family. But, not to get too technical, there's Fred wearing Fox Brothers. And I have a Fox Brothers trouser on. This trouser is the same. It's a darker color, but it's the same, comes from the same mill as Fox here. So I'm actually wearing Fox, at least in the trouser. But if you see this little sartorial thing here, look at that. This is little pictures of their business. Look at that. And if you can see here, it's kind of hard to see. This is how, see these hands here? Working on the garment. This world. This world of craft in Huddersfield, places like that. Macclesfield. I mean, there's even a whole tie called a Macclesfield tie. I mean, this is all UK stuff. This is very, very British stuff. And for many, many years, I was really interested in this. I got this book after all. And you can see one of the old looms. Look at that. There's the gentleman there with one of the mills. What does it say about this mill here? I'm going to get out. I thought this would be interesting because it is aesthetics. Now, one of the really interesting things and sort of thinking out loud is that we're dealing with aesthetics in the realm of, it's actually real life. In other words, it's actually utility or utilitarian. It's not make-believe. It's not dramatic fiction. And so in that sense, what we're talking about now is related to, say, architecture or, carpentry and things like that, because it's an actual real object for use. And again, these are taxonomic matters. There's been a lot of stuff written about aesthetics in terms of utility versus, versus, and for some people it is versus matters or things that are more lofty or higher in elevation. I mean, so for example, the filmmaker Andrei Tarkovsky was very adamant that his films were not meant for information or even knowledge. Now, as we know, knowledge is above information, right? It's closer to wisdom. But even wisdom is like a notch above information, or data, or even above knowledge, right? He said, he says, well, I make my films to get you ready for your death. That's what my films are for. That's what he said. He said that in Scorpion Time. But the reason I'm not changing the subject too much. I'm just using that as an example of aesthetics where it's closer to fine art or something that is not, strictly speaking, necessary, in the sense that you got to wear clothes, And then there's a kind of I think there are things in between. There are things like this jacket or this coat where it's for utility, it's for use, it's to wear on your back, but it's so well made and in my view, so beautiful that it actually partakes in some of the same qualities as a novel or an opera or a hip hop song or a ballet or a movie or even a television show. And these are these are my own opinions. I'm not trying to preach necessarily here, but I am saying that, Fred Astaire liked to wear clothes like this. He inspired me, and I thought I would share some of these things I have. Now, here are photos of him in rehearsal in the 50s. If I turn up this music here, again, I don't know about the copyright and licensing. All this is fair use. Like this show and the other shows I'm doing, it's for really education and edification, hopefully, too. And still I'm following every little clue. Now, well, that's a solo song I'm singing, but all the best songwriters of the 20s, 30s, and 40s into roughly 50s liked him the most to do their songs. So Irving Berlin, Cole Porter, Jerome Kern, they like to try their songs out with him because he phrased. This is going to sound like a cliche, but it's true. He phrased like a jazz musician. He phrased as a singer, not like a popular singer. So he wasn't really like Helen Morgan or Margaret Whiting at all. He was more a singer like, with the people in the group, with the cats in the group, almost like a Louis Armstrong, or Charlie Parker, in the way he, and Frank Sinatra was like that too. So occasionally in popular music, there had been singers, and he was one of them that had the phrasing and feeling of an improvising jazz artist. Billie Holiday, of course, was a jazz artist and had that. But, I've been thinking lately that in the rock world, I think Randy Newman, I think he's underrated as a singer. Of course, he's a wonderful lyricist, but I don't know why Randy Newman comes to mind. There's something about the way he approaches rhythm and phrasing that I think is comparable, if I must say. I mean, if I may be so bold as to say that. But then, of course, there's all these different styles of music. But anyhow, I had this book on cloth, about British cloth. But sometime when I first started really getting into Fred Astaire was in the 1980s. And I'm going to show you a book I purchased, one of my first books, coffee table books that I purchased with my own money in 1986 at you remember a place called Rizzoli's? Anybody out there remember Rizzoli's bookstore? Any event. Sarah Giles, the English author, did this little thing. Fred Astaire's Friends Talk. This little book. Beautiful book. It's falling apart, unfortunately. I don't know. It makes me sad. But and find something to show you here. So 19, I think 86. Yeah, this book. And it's, you know, it's this kind of book where all these, his friends talk, you know, it's basically a celebration of Fred Astaire. And he passed in the 80s. He died in the 80s. So you just open it randomly and see what people say. And the stuff they say is just like Jack Lemmon, one of the greatest actors ever, just ever, theater or film or anything. And Jack Lemmon says about Fred Astaire, he said he approached everything first as a warrior, not W-A, like worried. I'm worried, warrior. He worked like a demon. Talk about perfectionism. My God Almighty, he was the greatest taskmaster on himself that I've ever seen in my whole life. We did a 2-hour special on George and Ira Gerson's music a couple of years ago, and I was the MC. That's a great, by the way, if you can see it, it's on YouTube. Jack Lemmon and Fred Astaire. I don't know, but look for it. It's great. There was a section where Fred did excerpts from 6 or 7 songs that the Gersons had written for him, and it was all solo. He would go through them, and from the first take on, it was flabbergasting. It was stupendous. All those incredible songs, one after another, written specifically for him by the Gershwins. The studio was empty except for the technicians, Fred, and me, meaning Jack Lemmon, right? The director was in the control booth. Fred and I would sit by side on 2 stools in front of a monitor and watch Fred's stuff played back over and over. Nobody in the world could have found a frame that wasn't just gorgeous and wonderful. The singing and the dancing. But Fred would say over and over, I didn't like that inflection. That turn wasn't right. He was not concerned with what others would think. He was satisfying himself. Interesting. I mean, it's just things like that. I mean, it's just, want to see Ginger Rogers talk about him. This is getting very TC on this. We do need Ben Malkovich here. This is getting into that kind of, into that. Oh, goodness. I got to meet Stanley Donen because Stanley Donen and Elaine May are a couple. And when they would come to both of them to Harvard Film Archive, this is incredible. Getting to see Elaine May present Mikey and Nikki and the Heartbreak Kid in person. And she just brings Stanley Donen a lot. And then when they show Singing in the Rain and Stanley Donen comes and Elaine May was there, just beautiful. And Two for the Road with Albert Finney and Audrey Hepburn. I've had some incredible experiences. Any event, Stanley Donen is interviewed a lot in here because he said, Stanley Donen says about Ginger Rogers, she's heaven. She wasn't anything like a great dancer. That's interesting. She wasn't anything like a great dancer, but I don't even, this is embarrassing for Mr. Donen. I don't even repeat what he says here. I don't know. Look, I mean, it doesn't really matter. What people say. Of course, Dominique Dunn is interviewed here because he hung out with society people and all that. But, you know, I have had this book since 86, and I carry it because I love it so. I mean, probably my favorite book might be a first edition of his autobiography, Steps in Time. Now, this is really 50s. Now, see this artwork? This was very common in books of the 50s. I would say 52 to 40, I would say, like after the war, by which I mean World War II, 46, 47, up to like the mid-50s, you see these kinds of graphics on everything. You see this a lot in early television advertisement, and this kind of thing. But it's beautiful, this book. And you know, it's a really interesting account of that era, you know. I would really have loved to have seen him and Adele, his sister. I mean, from what I understand, they were like the hottest thing ever and the most, I mean, it's really invidious to make this comparison. I'm not going to make this comparison because, where's Ginger? Up there. Yeah, Ginger, can't see it. I'm going to bring it down. This is, look at that, signed. Isn't that beautiful? I mean, it's often, what the kind of comparison I was not going to make, but I was going to say that, I know that Fred and Ginger were the greatest ever in the 20th century. And we could go and literally go down every aspect of their artistic performance, singing, phrasing, diction, just everything. And then the dancing and then the acting in those films are incredible. But from what I understand, Adele, like in the 20s, the vaudeville period, Fred and Adele was really, really something. But we don't know. There's no documentation because, it's from 1926 or 27. And it's really interesting to think about, the nature, the evanescence of all art, and that it's both, it's evanescent and finite. It's also eternal at the same time. And it's an interesting thing. But this is just a small part of my Fred Astaire stuff. And I'm wearing this coat, and it doesn't really, it makes me happy to do these pop-up streams. I'm going to be doing things from time to time like this. And if you subscribe to Journey of an Aesthete podcast, you will get a memo, you'll get a note, you'll get I don't know what the term is, get a ring or a beep, or I don't really know. I don't know what they're calling it now, but I sort of feel like, before I leave, I'm going to play a little something for Mr. Fred Astaire. This will be very improvised because this is not something that I've ever done. So I don't know what we got here. Let's see what we have. Oh, don't know what's going to happen. That's the nature of improvisation. You don't. I mean, there's a certain school of thought that improvisation is like life, that life is improvised, right? I think so. I don't know. that's all for tonight. Have a great weekend. We're starting a new year, whether we want to or not. It's upon us, and I hope it's a decent one a great one for everybody. Thank you. Talk to you soon.